My dear students, hello. I welcome you all in our series of lectures on cybersecurity. Today, we are going to discuss about information security management. So, let us start with it. Information security describes activities that relate to the protection of information and information infrastructure assets against the risks of loss, misuse, disclosure or damage. Information security management describes controls that an organization needs to implement to ensure that it is sensibly managing these risks. Now, what are the various types of information security controls? Security is generally defined as the freedom from danger or as the condition of safety. Controls for providing information security can be physical, technical or administrative. These three categories of controls can be further classified as either preventive or detective. Preventive controls attempt to avoid the occurrence of unwanted events, whereas detective controls attempt to identify unwanted events after they have occurred. Preventive controls inhibit the free use of computing resources and therefore, can be applied only to the degree that users are willing to accept. Effective security awareness programs can help increase users' levels of tolerance for preventive controls by helping them to understand how such controls enable them to trust their computing systems. Common detective controls include audit trails, intrusion detection methods and checksums. Three other types of controls supplement preventive and detective controls. They are usually described as deterrent, corrective and recovery. Deterrent controls are intended to discourage individuals from intentionally violating information security policies or procedures. These usually take the form of constraints that make it difficult or undesirable to perform unauthorized activities or threats of consequences that influence a potential intruder to not violate security. For example, threats ranging from embarrassment to severe punishment. Corrective controls either remedy the circumstances that allowed the unauthorized activity or return conditions to what they were before the violation. Execution of corrective controls could result in changes to existing physical, technical and administrative controls. Recovery controls restore lost computing resources or capabilities and help the organization recover monetary losses caused by a security violation. Deterrent, corrective and recovery controls are considered to be special cases within the major categories of physical, technical and administrative controls. They do not clearly belong in either preventive or detective categories. For example, it could be argued that deterrence is a form of prevention because it can cause an intruder to turn away. However, deterrence also involves detecting violations which may be what the intruder fears most. Corrective controls on the other hand are not preventive or detective, but they are clearly linked with technical controls. When antiviral software eradicates a virus or with administrative controls when backup procedures enable restoring a damaged database. Finally, recovery controls are neither preventive nor detective, but are included in administrative controls as disaster recovery or contingency plans. Now, let us discuss each control one by one. Number 1, physical controls. Physical security is the use of locks, security guards, badges, alarms and similar measures to control access to computers, related equipment including utilities and the processing facility itself. In addition, measures are required for protecting computers, related equipment and their contents from espionage, theft and destruction or damage by accident, fire or natural disaster, for example, floods and earthquakes. Number 2, technical controls. Technical security involves the use of safeguards incorporated in computer hardware, operations or applications software, communications hardware and software and related devices. Technical controls are sometimes referred to as logical controls. Now, what are the preventive technical controls? Preventive technical controls are used to prevent unauthorized personnel or programs from gaining remote access to computing resources. Examples of these controls include access control software, antivirus software, library control systems, passwords, smart cards, encryption, dial-up access control and callback systems. Let us discuss them one by one. Number 1, access control software. The purpose of access control software is to control sharing of data and programs between users. In many computer systems, access to data and programs is implemented by access control lists that designate which users are allowed access. Access control software provides the ability to control access to the system by establishing that only registered users with an authorized logon ID and password can gain access to the computer system. After access to the system has been granted, the next step is to control access to the data and programs residing in the system. The data or program owner can establish rules that designate who is authorized to use the data or program. Number 2, antivirus software. Viruses have reached epidemic proportions throughout the microcomputing world and can cause processing disruptions and loss of data, as well as significant loss of productivity while cleanup is conducted. In addition, new viruses are emerging at an ever increasing rate, currently about 1 every 48 hours. It is recommended that antivirus software be installed on all microcomputers to detect, identify, isolate and eradicate viruses. This software must be updated frequently to help fight new viruses. In addition, to help ensure that viruses are intercepted as early as possible, antivirus software should be kept active on a system, not used intermittently at the discretion of users. Number 3, library control systems. These systems require that all changes to production programs be implemented by library control personnel instead of the programmers who created the changes. This practice ensures separation of duties, which helps prevent unauthorized changes to production programs. Number 4, passwords. Passwords are used to verify that the user of an ID is the owner of the ID. The ID password combination is unique to each user and therefore provides a means of holding users accountable for their activity on the system. Fixed passwords that are used for a defined period of time are often easy for hackers to compromise. Therefore, great care must be exercised to ensure that these passwords do not appear in any dictionary. Fixed passwords are often used to control access to the specific databases. In this use, however, all persons who have authorized access to the database use the same password. Therefore, no accountability can be achieved. Currently, dynamic or one-time passwords, which are different for each logon, are preferred over fixed passwords. Dynamic passwords are created by a token that is programmed to generate passwords randomly. Number 5, smart cards. Smart cards are usually about the size of a credit card and contain a chip with logic functions and information that can be read at a remote terminal to identify a specific user's privileges. Smart cards now carry pre-recorded, usually encrypted access control information that is compared with data that the user provides, for example, a personal ID number or biometric data, to verify authorization to access the computer or network. Number 6, encryption. Encryption is defined as the transformation of plain text, that is readable data, into ciphertext, that is unreadable data, by cryptographic techniques. Encryption is currently considered to be the only sure way of protecting data from disclosure during network transmissions. Encryption can be implemented with either hardware or software. Software based encryption is the least expensive method and is suitable for applications involving low volume transmissions. The use of software for large volumes of data results in an unacceptable increase in processing costs. Because there is no overhead associated with hardware encryption, this method is preferred when large volumes of data are involved. Number 7, dial-up access control and callback systems. Dial-up access to a computer system increases the risk of intrusion by hackers. In networks that contain personal computers or are connected to other networks, it is difficult to determine whether dial-up access is available or not because of the ease with which a modem can be added to a personal computer to turn it into a dial-up access point. Known dial-up access points should be controlled so that only authorized dial-up users can get through. Currently, the best dial-up access controls use a microcomputer to intercept calls, verify the identity of the caller using a dynamic password mechanism, and switch the user to authorized computing resources as requested. Previously, callback systems intercepted dial-up callers, verified their authorization and called them back at their registered number, which at first proved effective. However, sophisticated hackers have learned how to defeat this control using call forwarding techniques. Next is detective technical controls. Detective technical controls warn personnel of violations or attempted violations of preventive technical controls. Examples of these include audit trails and intrusion detection expert systems. Let us discuss them one by one. Number 1, audit trails. An audit trail is a record of system activities that enables the reconstruction and examination of the sequence of events of a transaction from its inception to output of final results. Violation reports present significant security oriented events that may indicate either actual or attempted policy transgressions reflected in the audit trail. Violation reports should be frequently and regularly reviewed by security officers and database owners to identify and investigate successful or unsuccessful unauthorized accesses. Number 2, intrusion detection systems. These expert systems track users on the basis of their personal profiles while they are using the system to determine whether their current activities are consistent with an established norm. If not, the user session can be terminated or a security officer can be called to investigate. Intrusion detection can be especially effective in cases in which intruders are pretending to be authorized users or when authorized users are involved in unauthorized activities. Next is administrative controls. Administrative or personnel security consists of management constraints, operational procedures, accountability procedures and supplemental administrative controls established to provide an acceptable level of protection for computing resources. In addition, administrative controls include procedures established to ensure that all personnel who have the access to computing resources have the required authorizations and appropriate security clearances. Now, let us learn about preventive administrative controls. Preventive administrative controls are personnel oriented techniques for controlling people's behavior to ensure the confidentiality, integrity and availability of computing data and programs. Examples of preventive administrative controls include number 1, security awareness and technical training, number 2, separation of duties, number 3, procedures for recruiting and terminating employees, number 4, security policies and procedures, number 5, supervision, number 6, disaster recovery, contingency and emergency plans, number 7, user registration for computer access. We are going to discuss them one by one. Number 1, security awareness and technical training. Security awareness training is a preventive measure that helps users to understand the benefits of security practices. If employees do not understand the need for the controls being imposed, they may eventually circumvent them and thereby weaken the security program or render it ineffective. Technical training can help users prevent the most common security problems, errors and omissions, as well as ensure that they understand how to make appropriate backup files and detect and control viruses. Technical training in the form of emergency and fire drills for operations personnel can ensure that proper action will be taken to prevent such events from escalating into disasters. Number 2, separation of duties. This administrative control separates a process into component parts with different users responsible for different parts of the process. Judicious separation of duties prevents one individual from obtaining control of an entire process and forces collusion with others in order to manipulate the process for personal gain. Number 3, recruitment and termination procedures. Appropriate recruitment procedures can prevent the hiring of people who are likely to violate security policies. A thorough background investigation should be conducted, including checking on the applicant's criminal history and references. Although this does not necessarily screen individuals for honesty and integrity, it can help identify areas that should be investigated further. 3 types of references should be obtained. Number 1, employment. Number 2, character, and number 3, credit. Employment references can help estimate an individual's competence to perform or be trained to perform the tasks required on the job. Character references can help determine such qualities as trustworthiness, reliability, and ability to get along with others. Credit references can indicate a person's financial habits, which in turn can be an indication of the maturity and willingness to assume responsibility of one's own actions. In addition, certain procedures should be followed when any employee leaves the company, regardless of the conditions of termination. Any employee being involuntarily terminated should be asked to leave the premises immediately upon notification to prevent further access to computing resources. Voluntary terminations may be handled differently depending on the judgment of the employee supervisors to enable the employee to complete work in process or train a replacement. All authorizations that have been granted to an employee should be revoked upon departure. If the departing employee has the authority to grant authorizations to others, these other authorizations should also be reviewed. All keys, badges, and other devices used to gain access to premises, information, or equipment should be retrieved from the departing employee. The combinations of all logs known to a departing employee should be changed immediately. In addition, the employee's login IDs and passwords should be cancelled, and the related active and backup files should be either deleted or reassigned to a replacement employee. Any special conditions to the termination, for example, denial of the right to use certain information, should be reviewed with the departing employee. In addition, a document stating these conditions should be signed by the employee. All terminations should be routed through the computer security representative for the facility, where the terminated employee works to ensure that all information system access authority has been revoked. Number 4, security policies and procedures. Appropriate policies and procedures are key to the establishment of an effective information security program. Policies and procedures should reflect the general policies of the organization as it regards the protection of information and computing resources. Policies should cover the use of computing resources, marking of sensitive information, movement of computing resources outside the facility, introduction of personal computing equipment and media into the facility, disposal of sensitive waste, and computer and data security incident reporting. Enforcement of these policies is essential to their effectiveness. Number 5, supervision. Often, an alert supervisor is the first person to notice a change in an employee's attitude. Early signs of job dissatisfaction or personal distress should prompt supervisors to consider subtly moving the employee out of a critical or sensitive position. Supervisors must be thoroughly familiar with the policies and procedures related to the responsibilities of their department. Supervisors should require that their staff members comply with the pertinent policies and procedures and should observe the effectiveness of these guidelines. if the objectives of the policies and procedures can be accomplished more effectively, the supervisor should recommend appropriate improvements. Job assignments should be reviewed regularly to ensure that an appropriate separation of duties is maintained, that employees in sensitive positions are occasionally removed from a complete processing cycle without prior announcement, and that critical or sensitive jobs are rotated periodically among qualified personnel. Number 6, disaster recovery, contingency and emergency plans. The disaster recovery plan is a document containing procedures for emergency response, extended backup operations and recovery should a computer installation experience a partial or total loss of computing resources or physical facilities or of access to such facilities. The primary objective of this plan, used in conjunction with the contingency plans, is to provide reasonable assurance that a computing installation can recover from disasters, continue to process critical applications in a degraded mode, and return to a normal mode of operation within a reasonable time. A key part of disaster recovery planning is to provide for processing at an alternative site during the time that the original facility is unavailable. Contingency and emergency plans establish recovery procedures that address specific threats. These plans help prevent minor incidents from escalating into disasters. For example, a contingency plan might provide a set of procedures that define the condition and response required to return a computing capability to nominal operation. An emergency plan might be a specific procedure for shutting down equipment in the event of a fire or for evacuating a facility in the event of an earthquake. Number 7, user registration for computer access. Formal user registration ensures that all users are properly authorized for system and service access. In addition, it provides the opportunity to acquaint users with the responsibilities for the security of computing resources and to obtain their agreement to comply with related policies and procedures. Next is detective administrative controls. Detective administrative controls are used to determine how well security policies and procedures are complied with, to detect fraud and to avoid employing persons that represent an unacceptable security risk. This type of control includes security reviews and audits, performance evaluations, required vacations, background investigations and rotation of duties. Let us discuss them one by one. Number 1, security reviews and audits. Reviews and audits can identify instances in which policies and procedures are not being followed satisfactorily. Management involvement in correcting deficiencies can be a significant factor in obtaining user support for the computer security program. Number 2, performance evaluations. Regularly conducted performance evaluations are an important element in encouraging quality performance. In addition, they can be an effective forum for reinforcing management support of information security principles. Number 3, required vacations. Tense employees are more likely to have accidents or make errors and omissions while performing their duties. Vacations contribute to the health of employees by relieving the tensions and anxieties that typically develop from long periods of work. In addition, if all employees in critical or sensitive positions are forced to take vacations, there will be less opportunity for an employee to set up a fraudulent scheme that depends on the employee's presence, for example, to maintain the fraud's continuity or secrecy. Even if the employee's presence is not necessary to the scheme, required vacations can be a deterrent to embezzlement because the employee may fear discovery during his or her absence. Number 4, background investigations. Background investigations may disclose past performances that might indicate the potential risk of future performance. Background investigations should be conducted on all employees being considered for promotion or transfer into a position of trust. Such investigations should be completed before the employee is actually placed in a sensitive position. Job applicants being considered for sensitive positions should also be investigated for potential problems. Companies involved in government classified projects should conduct these investigations while obtaining the required security clearance for the employee. Number 5, rotation of duties. Like required vacations, rotations of duties, that is moving employees from one job to another at random intervals, helps deter fraud. An additional benefit is that as a result of rotating duties, employees are cross-trained to perform each other's functions in case of illness, vacation or termination. With this, our lecture on information security management is over. Today, we learned that information security controls can be classified as physical, technical or administrative. These are further divided into preventive and detective controls. The organization's security policy should be reviewed to determine the confidentiality, integrity and availability needs of the organization. The appropriate physical, technical and administrative controls can then be selected to provide the required level of information protection as stated in the security policy. A careful balance between preventive and detective control measures is needed to ensure that users consider the security controls reasonable and to ensure that the controls do not overly inhibit productivity. The combination of physical, technical and administrative controls best suited for a specific computing environment can be identified by completing a quantitative risk analysis. Because this is usually an expensive, tedious and subjective process, however, an alternative approach referred to as meeting the standard of due care is often used. Controls that meet a standard of due care are those that would be considered prudent by most organizations in similar circumstances or environments. Controls that meet the standard of due care generally are readily available for a reasonable cost and support the security policy of the organization. They include at the least controls that provide individual accountability, auditability and separation of duties. With this, our lecture is over. In the next lecture, we will continue with this lecture and study various purposes of information security management. Till then, goodbye. Have a nice day.